Let's talk about Varuna, the 51st Warframe added to the game and a very melee focused one. I've already covered how you farm her and how long it takes in a previous video. This video will cover what her abilities do, including what the game refuses to tell you, and how you can get the most out of her. I'm Nick Engineer, let's solve the practical problem. On the surface, Varuna might look like a relatively simple Warframe. Her first ability makes her go invisible until she attacks and buffs her melee damage. Her second ability spreads a lot of status effects and can deal variable amounts of damage. Her third ability regenerates health orbs on melee kills and energy orbs on headshot kills. Finally, her fourth ability allows her to pounce, dealing scaling damage with lethal attacks. Simple, right? Far from it. Before diving into the abilities, we can start with the passives. Varuna has 4 of them, and they are not made equally. She can only have one passive running at a time, chosen by holdcasting the respective ability. Her one's passive is a parkour velocity bonus, allowing for longer dodge rolls and bullet jumps. Swapping to this is a good idea when moving through maps such as for rescue and capture, or when going between mobile defense locations. Her 2's passive is total status immunity, preventing you from taking any standard status effects from attacks, as well as staggers and knockdowns from both enemies and your own weaponry. This won't clear any active status effects, it only prevents you receiving new ones. I'd suggest this be your default go-to passive, as it protects from a whole host of issues. From Arson Xmas heat procs and knockdowns, to Energy Leech Xmas magnetic bubbles, Sensor Barrier magnetic procs, heavy unit knockdowns, Deadly Corpus electric procs, and so on. It's a lot easier to survive when half the things that could hurt you are blocked. Her 3's passive is 100% heavy attack efficiency. Bear in mind that heavy attack efficiency is always hard capped at 90%, so the extra 10% only matters when using a Riven that gives you negative heavy attack efficiency, countering that negative slightly. This passive not only enables heavy combo builds without modding for heavy attack efficiency, it also enables simpler low-cost activation of the Incarna mode on the Inodem and Praedos. Both of those require a heavy attack, and a quick passive switch from Varuna will make that almost free to use. Finally, Varuna's 4th passive is to cheat death. If Varuna would die, she instead is healed to full hit points and made briefly invulnerable. This passive goes on to a 60-second cooldown whether she uses it or swaps out to another passive. Because of how Warframe scales, typically you either will rarely die at all in a mission, or you'll struggle to avoid death for more than 60 seconds. Add on to this that being more mobile or being status immune is a huge boon to survivability, and the option to lock in intermittent death ward is actually not that valuable. Varuna is better served being able to switch between the other 3 passives at will to meet the situation she's in, rather than sitting on a backup plan which skips the first and better plan entirely. So with these passives in mind, let's look at what the core abilities have to offer. Varuna's first ability, Shroud of Dynar, is already filled with buffs. On cast, Varuna and her companion go invisible, either until the duration expires, or until Varuna attacks with a weapon. Varuna's abilities will temporarily break her invisibility, but it won't end it, only leaving you exposed whilst casting. Do be careful though, as repeat attacks this way can lead to you taking damage as enemies wise up to what's happening. While Varuna is invisible, she has double her normal movement speed, stacking with external buffs such as Volt Speed ability. If Varuna successfully hits with a melee attack to end her invisibility, she gains a few melee buffs for a few seconds, including from the melee attack that broke the invisibility. First, her melee critical damage is increased by 2 times, modified by her strength. This is added to the final value of the critical damage on her melee weapon. So if you have a 4.4 times critical damage multiplier on your weapon, and gain 2 times from Shroud of Dynar, then your melee will deal 6.4 times critical damage on a yellow crit. The second buff is that all of Varuna's melee attacks will inflict a slash status proc. This buff only counts actual melee attacks though. Ranged attacks from gunblades and explosion attacks from glaives do not get this force slash bonus, but their hits still count as melee for activating Shroud of Dynar's buffs. The third buff on the ability claims to be a 100% status chance increase. What it actually does is it sets your status chance to 100% if your status chance is below 100%. I've tested this extensively, with the weapon modded just below 100% status chance, never inflicting a second status proc, ignoring the force slash, despite the fact that even a slight status chance increase should make that possible. Likewise, a weapon with just 9% status chance would always proc a status effect whilst under the Shroud of Dynar buff. Sometimes that status effect was a second slash proc, meaning it can slip by notice, but it is there. A weapon with just over 100% modded status chance can still proc a second status effect, yet it didn't seem to do it any more often, with or without the ability. But as I said, this only improves your status chance if you are below 100% and has no effect above it. This status chance buff has no effect on range attacks such as on your gun blades. As if that buff isn't strange enough, the fourth and final buff isn't mentioned anywhere on the ability or tips. While the melee buffs are active, all melee attacks are guaranteed critical hits. If your critical chance is already over 100%, then this has no benefit to you, just like the status chance buff. However, this does mean that non-crit weapons become crit viable. Not only do you get the guaranteed crits, you also have Shroud of Dynar's absolute critical damage bonus. Even the Mark 1 bow, or yet lower crit melees, can put out reasonable critical damage this way. This critical buff does affect gunblades and glaives. If you get a melee kill whilst under the effects of Shroud of Dynar, the buff duration is increased by 5 seconds, but this can only trigger once. The minimum duration is hardlocked at 3 seconds, while the duration increase on kill is affected by ability duration. With 100% duration, this means a buff of 3 to 8 seconds, while with prime continuity added in, that's 3 to 10.75 seconds. If this all sounds like a lot, remember this is just Varuna's first ability. Onto her second, we have Fangs of Raksh. Varuna leaps towards a target in range, hitting them for 250 slash damage modified by her strength. This then applies 10 stacks of 5 random status effects to the target. Any of the physical types, primary elements, and combination status types can be applied in this manner. If all you care about is applying status procs for condition overload, then this is as far as you really need to care. 5 different status procs guaranteed is plus 400% damage for condition overload melees and galvanized primaries, or plus 600% for galvanized secondaries. You don't need me to tell you that is a lot. If any of the status procs applied deal damage, each proc scales off the ability's direct damage. For example, an electric proc deals 50% of modded damage per second, so 10 electric procs would deal 5 times the ability damage every second. If you happen to proc viral against health or magnetic against shields, this will multiply all damage by 4.25 times, increasing the damage over time of each set of 10 elemental procs to 21.25 times the ability damage, while for a set of 10 slash procs, this climbs to nearly 15 times ability damage per second. As these status effects are chosen at random from a pool of 13 different types, of which 5 are selected and 5 can deal damage over time, the chance of applying no damaging procs at all is just 4.35%. The chance of applying any given status effect, such as viral, is simply 5 in 13 or around 38%. And the chance of applying viral in addition to a damaging status effect at the same time is 35.74%. If you're curious on how these figures are calculated, I've shared the equations with explanations and a damage simulation over on my Patreon. The link for that is in the description. This makes Fangs of Raksh a very RNG dependent ability regarding which status procs are being applied and how effective they are. All told, Fangs of Raksh at 100% strength applies an average of about 4,700 damage per second per cast, accounting for viral and magnetic against unarmoured enemies. Armoured enemies are far more variable due to the effects of heat and corrosive, as well as slash bypassing armour. If you're targeting 4,700 armour, which is a 94% damage reduction and roughly the armour of a Scorpion at the start of the Steel Path, Fangs of Raksh will average close to 1,200 damage, but it can be a lot higher or a lot lower. For example, landing Slash and Viral, which has a 12.8% chance of happening, will alone deal 3,719 DPS at 100% strength. This means it's a bit hard to rely on Fangs of Raksh for damage output, but it is very capable of doing so. This damage becomes particularly important if the target dies. Fangs of Raksh will spread all the status effects it applies in an AoE around the target if it dies while those status effects are still active. This AoE penetrates all obstacles to hit even hidden enemies. It doesn't matter how the primed enemy dies, whether from your weapons, the ability, or something else entirely. It'll still spread the effects. Your window to spread the status is limited by how long the status effects last. For most, that's 6 seconds, while corrosive lasts for 8 seconds and radiation lasts for 12 seconds. However, just like with Shroud of Dynar, it's yet more complicated still. Fangs of Raksh doesn't just spread the status effects like what happens with the Mecha Set or Mark for Death ability. Instead, it has a rather convoluted process. If an enemy is hit by Fangs of Raksh, those 5 status types it applies are tracked until they all expire. It doesn't matter if you recast the ability or apply different status effects afterwards, only those 5 status types matter now until they all expire. Expiring means that every proc of the type has run out on the enemy. For example, if you proc Impact on the target, and then don't apply another Impact proc for 6 seconds, the Impact effects will expire and no longer be eligible to be spread. However, if you apply additional stacks of Impact at any point during those 6 seconds, then the ability will still be able to spread Impact procs on the enemy's death even after the initial Impact procs run out. Should you kill the enemy after all of the other initial status procs have expired, but you kept just one status active like the Impact proc, then only that maintained proc will spread. When Fangs of Raksh triggers due to the enemy dying, it checks which of the original types of status effects are still active and will target all enemies in range to apply those remaining status types 10 times over. This is true whether you apply extra stacks on the first enemy to put them over 10 procs, or if the initial procs ran out, leaving the primed enemy with as little as just one status proc remaining. Fangs of Raksh will always spread 10 of each eligible status effect. It gets weirder still. Fangs of Raksh doesn't deal your ability damage to the enemies in the AoE like you might expect. Instead, the damage of the status spread effect is related to the number of each tracked status type you have active on the enemy, and the total DPS of those damaging status procs. As far as I can tell, the ability will add up all of the damage proc DPS on the prime target, then divide it by the number of damaging procs on the prime target to get the average damage per proc per second. The ability takes this average damage per second and hits each enemy in range with enough damage so that each damaging proc applied deals this average damage per second. The eligible status procs are applied 10 times each, just like the original ability cast. Now if you're only using the ability and not otherwise applying status to an enemy, then this shouldn't be weird. If you have 10 slash procs dealing a total of 875 DPS, the ability divides 875 by 10 to get 87.5. Then it hits the nearby enemies hard enough to apply 10 slash procs each with 87.5 DPS. This spreads the same 875 DPS you had on your initial target. This gets weird when you don't just sit there and do nothing. Let's say you landed 10 slash procs with the ability, and the other procs were unimportant ones like Impact or Blast. You've applied 875 slash DPS modified by your strength. You then follow this up with a shot from Rubico Prime and apply a hefty 30,000 damage slash proc. When the enemy inevitably dies from this, the Fangs of Raksh ability whips out its calculator. With 30,875 slash DPS happening across 11 slash procs, the average slash proc is about 2,806. It hits the nearby enemies with 8,019 slash damage, which will likely show on screen as a lot less if they're armoured. This results in 10 slash procs, each dealing about 2,806 damage. 1 second later, the first tick of damage happens, slapping all affected enemies with 28,068 damage. At least, theoretically. It's not quite so clear cut in practice, as strange other things are going on in the game mechanics, such as occasionally the ability damage itself is increased by 80%, 160%, or just reduced to 0 seemingly at random. That's one bug I can't find the root of at all. Still, the main feature is that you can indeed apply extra damage to the damaging status procs, like for Slash or Heat, and the ability will spread that, but in a weird, slightly watered down way. But if you're patient enough, or the enemy is tough enough, you can scale this even further. Remember, the spread effect will still apply so long as you keep the status effect active, even if the original 10 have timed out. Let's do away with the hypotheticals now. Here I apply Fangs of Raksh while using Blind Range for 199% strength, delivering a 36 DPS stack of Toxin procs and a 1742 DPS stack of Slash procs. Shooting once with the Rubico, I managed to apply a further 2 slash status effects. This keeps the timer up for the Slash stack and applies a Slash proc DPS of 9641. A short moment later, just after the original status effects have expired, but the later slashes are still there, I apply another slash proc via a headshot. This applies 37,599 slash DPS in addition to the 2 slash procs already doing 9,641 DPS. The smaller slash procs time out, leaving just the single slash proc of over 37,000 remaining, killing the enemy in the next tick. The moment that enemy is killed, we see all nearby ones get slammed with a hit of 1,440 damage and applying slash procs. Bear in mind that 1,440 damage is after the damage reduction due to armor, which does not reduce the slash procs. You can see the 10 slash status effects active on one of the nearby enemies, despite the original enemy only having one slash proc remaining at the time, and that slash proc was not one of the original ones applied. As I mentioned, we've maintained the status effect for the ability, and it has multiplied it by 10. 1 second later, those 10 slash procs, each dealing over 37,000 damage, slam into all the enemies for 375,987 damage. The primed enemy's body has not yet hit the floor, yet everything around it has just been deleted. Actually, I think some of the bodies straight up vanished, they got hit so hard. By comboing an ability that dealt just 1,742 slash DPS and a heavy hitting sniper rifle, it made an AoE of hundreds of thousands of damage. And that was without viral procs. Whether or not this is a bug is hard to say. On the one hand, it seems to be a crazy amount of damage spreading that may not have been intended. On the other hand, I can't think of a reason to program the ability to spread in this manner if it wasn't intended. Why not just have the ability recast the same damage onto nearby enemies? Why not just spread the status procs as they are individually? Why not give the ability a fixed time window? It takes a few design choices in combination to allow this scaling effect to happen, so maybe it's an intended hidden feature. This means that Fangs of Rax actually scales into higher level missions by way of scaling from your weapons without needing ability strength. So to very quickly recap that ability before we move on, it's a 5 status applying condition overload boosting monster, which will spread the status effects to nearby enemies when you kill the original target. It can only spread the first 5 status types applied by the ability, regardless of recast, until all of the original status types have expired. However, it can also include the damage added by matching status procs from your weapons and abilities, potentially unleashing a super nuke if everything aligns. Also, the ability won't leap at an enemy if there is a slight obstruction between your feet and theirs. Yeah. Let's move on to Lycath's Hunt, Varuna's third ability. This ability is the one she offers to the helmet system, and all considered, it is a lot simpler than everything else in her kit. While active, if Varuna gets a melee kill, then the enemy drops a health orb. If she gets a headshot kill, the enemy drops an energy orb. These orbs are in addition to random drops, allowing you to get a double energy or double health orb drop if the random one happens at the same time. The duration on this ability starts off relatively low, but if Varuna kills an enemy by any means whilst they have 5 or more status effects on them, such as from Fangs of Rax, then the timer on Lycath's Hunt is extended. At base, these durations are a 20-second initial duration and plus 5 seconds per 5 status kill, both affected by your ability duration. The timer caps out at 60 seconds regardless of your stat, but you can keep refreshing up to that cap indefinitely. There is no effect from range or strength on this ability, it's just a buff to Varuna triggered by how you kill enemies. On the helmet version, the orb drop rate is reduced from a guaranteed drop to 50% each time, and other warframes cannot activate the heavy attack efficiency passive that Varuna can. Mechanically, there's nothing more to say about this ability, it just functions as expected. Strategically, it is amazing. By pouring out health orbs with every melee kill, this functions as a reliable source of healing for Varuna. In combination with the mod Health Conversion to generate armor from health orb pickups, and the Arbitration mod Adaptation to further increase damage resistance, Varuna can actually survive surprisingly well through sheer health tanking. The inclusion of Health Conversion for armor is crucial, as Varuna's base armor is only 190. That is lower even than Excalibur and Hydroid. By using the mod Equilibrium, Varuna can also generate huge amounts of energy from those health orbs. That way, she doesn't have to worry about getting headshots. Just make sure you have a way of constantly picking up health orbs, such as the companion mod Synth Fiber or using the Aura Combat Discipline. Otherwise, if you're at full health, you won't be picking up the orbs, giving you no energy and no armor for when you need it. Even if you're not health tanking, this ability is still amazing. The energy gain via melee and Equilibrium, or through headshot kills, will allow constant casts of Shrouded Dinar to go invisible on demand, or any desired ability to combo with Brief Respite and Augur mods for shield gating purposes. Basically, it's a good sustainability. And so after that very useful, if semi-passive ability, we get to finally look at Ulfrin's Descent, Varuna's fourth and ultimate ability. Ulfrin's Descent will lock you out of all other weapons while active, though will still allow you to cast Varuna's other abilities. It gives you 5 charges of a leap attack, dealing at base 5000 slash damage with a guaranteed slash proc. As the ability says, if the target has any status effects on them, regardless of type or count, the base damage is doubled. Having more than one status effect on the target doesn't give you any additional benefit though, outside of what those status effects would normally do. The ability text also states that lethal attacks double the damage. This however is wrong. Kills through direct damage, but not the slash status, will increase the damage of the remaining leaps by 200%, as shown on the UI. So you get 1 times, 3 times, 5 times, 7 times, and finally 9 times damage. Upon leaping to the target, it also creates a damaging zone, hitting the target and nearby enemies for slash damage every second. Unlike the main attack, this damage each second does not apply a slash status effect, so it's just chunks of additional damage. Kills via this zone also do not improve the damage of the main leap. The damage of the zone does benefit from both the doubling from a status effect on an enemy, as well as the multiplier from successful direct kills. In a further patch after the initial release of Varuna, DE added some critical stats to Ulfrin's Descent. It has a base 20% critical chance and 1.5 times critical multiplier, and is able to gain 5 percentage points critical chance and 0.5 times critical multiplier with each direct damage kill. The critical chance of this ability cannot be boosted by things like Smeeter's Charm nor Arcane Avenger. That all said, you do not need to worry about those base crit stats whatsoever. You see, despite Ulfrin's Descent being an ability attack, not a melee attack, it benefits from the melee bonuses of Shroud of Dynar. You retain your invisibility after the strike, while still getting the critical damage bonus and guaranteed critical hits. With 100% strength, this means your first leap will deal 17,500 damage instead of 5,000, and this can still be doubled by having a status effect on the target. If you increase your strength to 200% one way or another, the base damage climbs to 10,000, it doubles again with an active status proc to 20,000, and then it's multiplied by the crit bonus to 110,000 damage. If your Fangs of Rax also applied viral or magnetic, depending on if you're hitting health or shields, this climbs further to 467,500 damage with the very first strike. With 4 successful kills in a row like this, your final attack will deal just over 4 million damage without even considering the extra critical damage from multiple lethal kills. I'd show you hitting it the full max of nearly 6 million damage, but it was unfortunately bugged at the time of recording this. Unfortunately, despite the millions of potential damage that this ability could put out, there are some pretty hefty issues with it. Because Ulfrin's Descent is not a melee attack, nor can you aim for headshots, it cannot give you the health and energy or benefits of Lycav's Hunt, Varuna's primary sustain option. You will also want to be casting Shroud of Dynar and at least one cast of Fang of Rash to get the most out of Ulfrin's Descent. Those combined cost 175 energy before energy efficiency, so it's an expensive ability to use, and the reliance on orb drops to fuel this expense, a method that works for the rest of Varuna's kit, doesn't work here. Also, by locking you out of your other weapons, Ulfrin's Descent removes options you may want to use to support your attacks. For example, you'll struggle to make use of a status primer weapon as you can only prime enemies before casting Ulfrin's Descent. Effectively, it doesn't just lean on Fangs of Rax and Shroud of Dynar, this ability requires them. With Ulfrin's Descent dealing slash damage with a proc, this means it deals reduced damage to armor targets whilst also applying a status effect which fully bypasses armor. As a result, stronger armored enemies can become very tough to target. While 500,000 to 4 million damage can sound like a lot, an elite lancer at the start of the Steel Path, just level 101, already has over 800,000 effective hit points. Against Slash, that rises to 1.9 million due to their armor. Without a proper armor strip, you're likely to kill the Steel Path Grineer through Slash status, not through direct damage. Because these status proc kills do not count to the bonus damage on follow-up hits, this means that Ulfrin's Descent is one of the only abilities, maybe even the only ability, to not just get comparatively weaker at higher levels, but it deals actually less damage at higher levels. So in order to make Ulfrin's Descent work, you need to basically build as if Varuna's third ability doesn't exist. No more relying on the health and energy orb drops or tanking through health conversion and adaptation. Ulfrin's Descent is solely for use whilst under invisibility, and with a lot of efficiency to continue to afford to cast it. Against the Corpus and Infested, this is still doable, it's just a wholly different way of playing. As all of your other attacks would break your invisibility entirely, relying on invisibility tanking means your only real weapon is just Ulfrin's Descent. As for dealing with the Grineer, you can't cast subsumed abilities whilst Ulfrin's Descent is active. You could subsume in an armor removal ability like Terrify to use before casting Ulfrin's Descent, but good luck finding an enemy that's both still alive and has their armor removed by the time you're on your 5th strike. Otherwise, you are forced to use the Onairu Operator Focus Call to remove enemy armor that way. Even then, you'll still be stuck with a high energy demand compared to the kills you generate. Ultimately, I'd just not bring Ulfrin's Descent build to a high level Grineer mission. The armor they get coupled with Varuna's demand for direct damage kills, not slash proc kills, just makes it more hassle than it's worth. So now that you properly understand what Varuna is actually doing with her abilities, we can look at how to mod her for a full build. For a generic one-size-fits-all build, you can use this all-rounder. This utilises a health tank with health conversion to give you a max of 1540 armor, alongside adaptation for a further 90% damage reduction, and vitality for buffer to give you more time to react to high damage situations. The Shepherd aura simply fits the aura polarity here, providing a small boost to companion survivability that is most effective on Sentinels due to the lack of link mods. Otherwise, you can use the Combat Discipline aura to proc Arcane Avenger, or apply an aura former to open up options such as the Mecha set or Growing Power. For casting, we've got Blind Rage to boost strength, with Equilibrium covering the drop in efficiency by turning the health orbs from Varuna's melee kills into an abundance of energy. Prime Flow ensures you've got enough energy max to actually make use of that energy when you need it, and Stretch is pushing the status spread from Fangs of Raksh as far as it can go. Archon Continuity increases the duration of Varuna's 1, makes her 3 easier to maintain, and will support Helminth abilities as well. The choice of Archon versus Prime Continuity is entirely optional, however. Varuna only has a chance to deliver Toxin with Fangs of Raksh in the first place, and then it'll only cause 1 proc of Corrosive rather than 10. Likewise, if the ability spreads, the Corrosive isn't spread 10 times, but instead Archon Continuity procs once again with the Toxin spread to give you only 1 Corrosive proc on the spread to enemies. So Prime Continuity is just fine here as it's barely a downgrade. For this build, I wouldn't recommend using Ulfrin's Descent due to the high energy cost, so that can be swapped out for your choice of Helminth ability. Most of the powerful options can slot in here, like Roar and Eclipse for damage buffs, Warcry for melee attack speed, Ensnare for crowd control, Nourish for team-wide energy support and viral damage, Terrify or Thara Strike for defense reduction, or Silence to shut down enemy abilities, especially on Xmas units. Any of those abilities will work just fine, it really comes down to what your preference is. I highly recommend using Arcane Avenger on this build, as you should be expecting to take hits. This can turn those hits into extra crits for Shroud of Dynar to buff. For the other Arcane slot, you can take your pick, such as Arcane Strike for more melee speed, or Arcane Grace for more passive defense. Don't use status immunity arcanes, as Varuna's second passive covers that, and there's no need for Arcane Fury or Arcane Energize, as Varuna's 2 and 3 will more than cover what those arcanes can do. The reason the Exla slot isn't filled in on this build is due to the expense of the mods and the polarities needed for this build and the others. If you're only using this build, then you can form a Blind Rage or Vitality to be able to fit in an Exlus of your choice. For our second build, we do away with the strength bonuses in favour of sheer range on Varuna. This is designed for exploding groups of enemies by using the supercharged status spread on Varuna's 2, combined with a heavy hitting weapon. Our defense remains just as strong, while we now also have overextended in place of Blind Rage. That one change means Shroud of Dynar is no longer providing much of a damage buff, but it's still guaranteeing slash procs on melee attacks. Instead, this allows us to use Fangs of Raksh at a much higher range and spread the status a further 6 meters, up from 10 meters to a radius of 16. The cast costs have also come down, making it cheaper to spam Fangs of Raksh if you're in lower enemy density missions. All the same Arcane, Aura and Exla slot advice applies as from the first build. Again, this build does not utilise Ulfrin's Descent, but the lower strength also removes most helmet options, leaving you with choices like Ensnare or Silence. With both the first and second build, you'll want to be making use of both Fangs of Raksh and Shroud of Dina if you're using melee, or just Fangs of Raksh if you're using ranged weapons. The guaranteed critical hits, guaranteed status procs, and 4 slash procs of Shroud of Dina all apply even with reduced strength on the second build. If you're not equipping Condition Overload or its galvanized equivalent to pair with this approach, you're actively leaving a lot of damage behind, so make sure you've got those on your weapons. In our third build, we change things entirely. Swapping into high energy efficiency, we enable use of Ulthrin's Descent at the cost of basically all survivability. This combination of casting stats enables heavy use of strong attacks from Ulthrin's Descent without instantly running out of energy. To use this build, stay under the invisibility provided by Shroud of Dina as much as possible. Use Fangs of Raksh to bribe enemies, and then use Ulthrin's Descent to slice them apart. You won't be using your weapons with this build, as being visible is very vulnerable. The inclusion of Molt Augmented helps this build gain in power over time, doubly so as Ulthrin's Descent benefits from strength twice, both in the base damage and in the crit damage granted by Shroud of Dina. I would advise not using this build against heavily armoured enemies, such as Steel Path Grineer. For everything else, you should be fine so long as you have a good source of energy. Arcane Energize works wonders, and you can use Zeneric's Wellspring with the occasional free ability cast to support your hunt. Archon Stretch is an expensive mod, but the extra energy regen from some casts of Fangs of Raksh can still help you sustain if you happen to have the mod. Archon Continuity is once again completely optional versus the primed version. In fact, I don't think you'll notice the difference between the two continuity mods here. For Helminth here, you can subsume high duration abilities over Lycav's Hunt, as that ability won't really come into play for this build. You can use Roar for more damage, Silence to shut down enemy abilities, or your pick of Nourish or Dispensary to help with energy generation. Finally, on our fourth build, we lean into an entirely different form of survival, and otherwise return to the first two builds in terms of relying on our 1, 2 and 3 abilities. Brief Respite, combined with a couple Augur mods, Blind Rage and the Decaying Dragon Key, will allow Varuna to fully restore her shields with every cast of her 1 or 2, constantly refreshing her shield gate. Rolling Guard adds an extra layer of survival with its brief invulnerability periods on demand. Both Archon mods are once again entirely optional versus their non-Archon counterparts for you to build as you see fit. As you have no hit point based defense, it is crucial to keep out of danger with this setup, otherwise you'll burn through your energy just trying to stay alive. The switch to shield gating defense means you have higher strength and range on your abilities, and can theoretically take this build to much higher levels than the all-rounder, but it is a more intense setup to use with less room for error. Again, the same freedom for Helminth options apply to override Ulthrin's Descent, as the fourth ability is simply too expensive to be of use on this build. For all of these builds, in terms of the weapons you should bring, you'll get the best results from hard-hitting precision ranged weapons or hard-hitting melee weapons. You don't need to focus on slash melees, thanks to the bonus from Shroud of Dina, opening up strong yet lower meta weapons like many hammers. On the other hand, ranged melees like gunblades and glaives, or radial weapons like rocket launchers, have far lower synergy with Varuna and these builds. So Varuna is, on the surface, a pretty simple frame, and in gameplay can be simple enough to employ. The details behind her, however, are surprisingly involved, with a myriad of caveats and details. At the very least, I hope you've learned something new about this brand new Warframe. If you're enjoying the over 100 videos available on this channel, consider showing your support by becoming a member either on Patreon or here on YouTube directly. In any case, that's all from me for now though, so as always, bring wolves, hunt enemies, and fight well, Tenno.